In this lesson, we'll be learning about and practicing rates and unit rates, meeting the requirements for TEKS 64D. A rate is a comparison of two quantities measured in different units. Now you might be thinking that sounds a lot like a ratio, and it is a lot like a ratio. It is a comparison of two quantities. However, this comparison is of two quantities not of the same attributes, but in fact measured in different units. For example, let's say I were to travel 250 miles and I were to do that in 5 hours. I traveled 250 miles in 5 hours. This comparison is of two quantities, but they're measured in different units, miles and hours. 250 miles in 5 hours. This is a rate. A unit rate is a rate that has been simplified to have a denominator of 1. When we speak about unit rates, we'll often hear words like per or each, and I'll show you how this works. Let's go back to our example from earlier. I traveled 250 miles and I did so in 5 hours. Now, if I wanted to know my rate per hour, how far or how fast did I travel per hour or each hour? I would simplify my rate so that my denominator was 1 hour. Now we know how to write equivalent fractions. If I have a denominator of 5 and I need a denominator of 1, I can simply scale down from 5 to 1 by dividing by 5. So if I did the same thing to my numerator, then my new numerator would be 250 divided by 5, or 50 miles. 50 miles per hour. If I traveled 250 miles in 5 hours, if my rate was 250 miles in 5 hours, my unit rate would be 50 miles per hour. 50 miles per hour, my unit rate. In order to determine if two rates are equivalent, I need to determine whether or not the two fractions that these rates are written as are equivalent fractions. For example, what if I said I made 4 shots, 4 made, out of 8 shots taken? So when I took 8 shots, I made 4 of them. Now let's say you went into the gym and you took 12 shots. And when you took those 12 shots, you made 6 of them. How can I find out if these are equivalent rates? Did we shoot the ball at the same rate? Well, I think we should simplify. I know that I can simplify my rate using the greatest common factor of 4. So that I would simplify to 1 shot made for 2 shots taken. Now I know I can simplify your rate by 6. And that if I simplify by the greatest common factor shared by 6 and 12, the number 6, I get that you made 1 shot for every 2 shots taken. You and I took a different number of shots. We made a different number of shots, but our rate was exactly the same. For every 2 shots we took, we made 1 of them. We made half of the shots we each took. These rates are equivalent. Well, what if I made 8 shots when I took 20 shots? And you made 12 shots when you took 24 shots. Would these be equivalent? Once again, I recommend we simplify. So, 8 shots out of 20 would simplify by 4 to where my new rate would be 2 made for 5 taken. 2 out of 5. I could simplify 12 over 24 by 12. And that would give you a rate of 1 shot made for every 2 shots you took. Now, is 2 to 5 equivalent to 1 to 2? How would we compare these two rates? How would we compare these two fractions? In order to find out whether they're equivalent, I need to find common denominators. And I know that 5 and 2 can have a common denominator of 10. And that I can scale 5 to 10 by multiplying by 2. So I would do the same thing to my numerator, which would give me 4 shots made for 10 shots taken. And that if I scaled 2 up to 10 by multiplying by 5, I would do the same thing to my numerator. And that your rate would become 5 shots made for 10 shots taken. So I would make 4 shots out of 10. You would make 5 shots out of 10. These are different rates. You shot better than me. These rates are not equivalent. Rates and unit rates. How will you most likely use them in everyday life? I would say that you're most often going to use rates and unit rates as part of comparison shopping. You're out shopping, spending your money, and you want to make sure you're getting a good deal. You want to make sure you're getting the best deal. And so how can you tell? Well, if you're out at lunch and you're looking to get some pizza, here's an example. You know that you can go to the local pizza joint and get a slice of pizza for $2. You're going to pay $2 for each slice. The rate is $2 per slice. But you also know at that same pizza joint, you could buy the entire pizza, all 8 slices of it, for $12 at a rate of $12 for 8 slices, right? All 8 slices of that pizza make up the entire pizza. So $2 per slice, I already have a unit rate right here. $2 a slice. But I don't have a unit rate over here. I have $12 for 8 slices. In order to get a unit rate, I need to have a denominator of 1. So how can I make my 8 slices, my denominator of 8, into a denominator of 1? And if you said, well, you could divide it by 8, you would be right. 8 divided by 8 gives me a denominator of 1. If I'm going to do that, in order to have an equivalent rate, I need to divide my $12 by 8. I need to divide 12 by 8. I know that I can fit one group of 8 inside of 12. 1 times 8 is 8. 12 minus 8 is 4. I need to add a decimal because I don't want a remainder, and a 0 that I bring down. I can make 5 groups of 8 out of 40. In fact, 8 times 5 is 40. 40 minus 40 is 0. So 8 divided into 12, or 12 divided by 8, is 1.5. But we're talking money. Am I going to have $1.5? Absolutely not. I need to write it as $1.50. I need to add that zero in the hundreds place. $1.50 per slice. So now I have $2 per slice and $1.50 per slice. Which is the better deal? If I buy the entire pizza for $12, I'm paying $1.50 per slice. That's the better deal because the price is lower for each slice. Let's go ahead and wrap up the lesson. First, I told you that a rate is a comparison between two items measured in different units. So for example, I said if I traveled 250 miles and I did that in 5 hours, that would be a rate. 250 miles compared to the amount of time it took me, 5 hours. That's a rate. Then I said that a unit rate is a rate where the denominator is 1. So to know the unit rate, I would need to know how far I traveled in 1 hour, and that I could write equivalent fractions by scaling. I could scale down from 5 hours to 1 hour by dividing by 5. And if I scaled down by 5, the number of miles I traveled, 250 miles divided by 5, would tell me that I traveled 50 miles in 1 hour. I traveled 50 miles per hour. For each hour, I drove 50 miles. The rate was 250 miles in 5 hours. The unit rate was 50 miles per hour. Then I said, let's talk about equivalent rates. How do I know if two rates are equivalent? And I said, well, if I traveled, say, 250 miles, and I did it in 5 hours, and you said, well, I traveled 300 miles, and I did that in 8 hours, how would we find out whether these were equivalent? And I would say, let's make them into unit rates. Let's scale down my 5 hours to 1 hour. I need to rewrite my rate having a denominator of 1. So 5 divided by 5 would give me 1. And 250 divided by 5 would give me 50. So I traveled 50 miles per hour. For you, again, we would need to have how far you traveled for each hour, a unit rate. So to get there, you had to scale down by 8. 8 hours divided by 8 gave you 1 hour. So 300 miles divided by 8, 300 divided by 8 would be 37.5. I traveled 50 miles an hour. You traveled 37.5 miles per hour. Which rate was greater? Mine. I drove 50 miles per hour. You drove 37.5 miles per hour. Are they equivalent? Absolutely not. They have totally different unit rates.